Easter. Easter. That time when we come to church to hear that story that is central to the Christian faith, everything that makes up what we believe as Christians. A babe born in a manger grew up, was a young man. He taught, he healed people, claimed he was the Son of God. He was judged, tried, and crucified because he incited a sense of imbalance within the religious community of his day, as well as the governing principles that surrounded him. He died, was buried in a tomb, and came back to life. Opening the tomb on Easter morning is very much like the spring's version of Christmas, in which we open a present. Except that this present isn't adorned with nice, shiny wrapping paper or a nice golden bow. No, rather, in this case, we're not too sure about this gift that's in the box in the first place because it's not there. Where is this gift? Nevertheless, we are led to believe that the gift reappears and walks among the living as someone who once was dead. Therefore, that spring Christmas is very much seeming a lot like spring's Halloween. Or as one commentator has stated it, the gift of Easter is about the walking dead. Call it an Easter apocalypse. It seems the current cultural obsessions with zombies and vampires, things that come back to life after they die, just runs a bit rampant in our society, or at least in pop culture. Consider the television show titled The Walking Dead, in which a bunch of people who are infected with the virus die, come back to life, and decide to feast on those who are left among the living. Another twist on this life after death topic of The Walking Dead is a television drama show titled Resurrection. The premise is of loved ones who have died, and then many years later they come back to life. Jacob. Oh, Jacob, he's the first one who comes back to life. He's this little 10-year-old boy who died some 32 years ago because of a drowning accident. He comes back to life and he returns home into the uncertainties, to the stare of suspicion, and with the eyes of his own father looking at him, wondering, who is this standing in front of me? I invite you to watch the trailer from the show Resurrection as it appeared a couple of years ago.
This kid showed up in a village in rural China out of nowhere. Hasn't said a word since we found him. No ID, no passport. The name Jacob is written in pin on the inside collar of his jersey.
Jacob? My name's J. Martin Bellman. You can call me Marty. Arcadia, Missouri. Is that where you're from? If I took you to Arcadia, could you show me the way to get to your house? Mr. Langston, what's this about? Did your son go missing, sir?
Mine.
I have. He's okay.
My son died 32 years ago. Hello there.
What turning green and goes a million miles per hour?
Frog in a blender.
Daddy!
Honey, who is it?
Jacob.
seems to believe they're his parents.
As far as what Jacob knows, I can only assume he's been coached.
The DNA test came back. Somehow, Jacob is your son. Can you tell me everything you remember about the day you fell in the river?
It was my Aunt Barbara who tried to help her. But I was moving too fast.
What do you remember after that?
Nothing. Did I die?
What?
Did we all die?
I don't know.
How he got here on this earth, why he was chosen.
But isn't that the price of human understanding?
I know you're having trouble accepting it, but that boy is ours.
I saw you. The moment you saw him, you believed.
Believe what? The impossible.
Jacob.
What is it? What is it about death, the afterlife, and even coming back to life that makes us question our beliefs and rattles our faith? Is there life after death? Well, that seems to be the question when somebody dies. Is Grandma alive after she's lived a long life? Where is she? Where is Michael, who battled with cancer? Where is the little girl whose mother beat her to death? Where is the boy who was killed by a stray bullet? Television shows like Resurrection raise such questions of life after death and what happens to our loved ones. What if they were to come back to life? Would they be the same? Easter is that day of big questions, and maybe it's a day in search of big answers. There are questions such as, where is Jesus? Where is Jesus now? What does the future look like? And is Jesus the same today as he was before? See, the purpose of this day of Easter is in which we gather to celebrate the return of Jesus, to celebrate Jesus' life, to celebrate your life, and to celebrate my life too. It's Easter. It was Easter, long time ago. Except for they weren't calling it Easter just quite yet. A couple of Jesus' followers go to the tomb where Jesus had been placed just a couple days earlier, but he's not there. Where is Jesus? The women wonder, where is Jesus? The messenger answers, he's not here. Why not? He's been raised. The messenger ponders the answer, or provides the answer to that biggest question. That following the loss of any loved one, we read that they're not trapped in graves, they have been raised. Jesus has been raised. You have been raised. I have been raised. Because of Easter, we discover that the solution to death is discovered in an empty tomb. The tomb is empty. He's not there. But this is not a complete answer to the question, where is Jesus? After all, we would not be simply satisfied by discovering that a loved one's body was no longer in his or her grave too. Emptiness. Emptiness can tell us so much. Emptiness often leaves us with too much. Too much loss. Too much despair. Too much feeling like we are helpless. Feeling like we too are at a loss. Too much grief. And haven't we been through this just long enough? All this grief, this despair, this loss. Isn't 3 days enough? Isn't the many several years long enough? And hasn't Jesus been through this enough as well? As we gather once again to kill Jesus on a Friday, and to gather again a few days later and to say, he ain't dead no more. He wasn't dead in the first place. And I give thanks for that. But see, much more important than asking where Jesus is the question is, where is Jesus now? Where is he now? In other words, Jesus not only answers the death questions, but Jesus also answers the life question. The messenger proclaims, he's ahead of you. Well, of course Jesus is ahead of us. He's always ahead of us. He's always leading the way. He's on the road. He's on his way to Galilee. He's here now and in the spaces ahead. He's in the spaces to come. This is the Jesus that's given the name at birth, Emmanuel, God with us. And this is the Jesus who promises to be with us always and to the end of time. Jesus hasn't gone anywhere, folks. The question of death is resolved around the question of life as it is engaged. Jesus is God with us in life, in death, in life. The walking dead is the walking life. It's a mission. It's a mission into the future that God has something in store for us. So often when a loved one dies, we focus on the past. We try to think about the good times, not so much the bad times or the last month or few weeks or hours. But we struggle with our regrets and wish that maybe we could have handled certain situations a little bit differently. But with resurrection, the focus is always forward. It's always toward the everlasting life. The resurrection gives us a better future, both in this life and the next. For the community of faith, it's a promise for us that Jesus will meet us up in the mission of the church. That mission is to walk in the presence of God's kingdom that has come. 3 chapters before the empty tomb, Jesus says to his followers and those who question his presence, he says, "Come, come, inherit the kingdom of God that is prepared for you. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. I was dead and you came to my tomb. I'm alive and we walk together today." You see, when we care for the least, the last and the lost of our brothers and sisters among us, we are caring for Jesus. And Jesus meets us in this world whenever we follow the guidance to do the work in the kingdom. Our own lives are improved when we look beyond ourselves to the needs of others. And in looking in the needs of others, there's a mirror that's held up to us and we say, "Oh my goodness, I have needs too." And it's the person in whom which we've been seeking is the one who comes and leads us forward into the healing and wholeness of the resurrection in our lives. When we walk with others, we walk with the risen Christ, and we are made alive. See, the resurrection gives us a future in the sense of God's heavenly kingdom. When Jesus encounters the women on the road, what he demonstrates to them is a life is something that doesn't end at the tomb. It doesn't end at death, but it continues with joy, with clarity, with a sense of restoration, with a renewed relationship with God and with others and with ourselves. Although the disciples deserted Jesus and fled, Jesus clarifies the mission of the resurrection that restores those broken relationships that are healed by forgiveness and reconciliation. Easter Day is a day of big questions, but seems to be filled with big answers as we try to ask those questions of where is Jesus? Where is he now? And what's the future going to look like? The experiences of the Marys and the disciples teach us that the dead will not be trapped in tombs or in any sort of box or in a book that sits on a shelf. But instead they will be raised. We know that Jesus goes ahead of us. The resurrection answers for us not only our questions about walking in death, but our walking in life. Through the resurrection of Jesus, we're given the promise of a marvelous future, both in this life and in the next. Why? Why? Because it's Easter. Not just today, but all of the days. It's Easter. This last week, I met with a friend, and he's been helping me talk through some grief issues that I'm dealing with on a personal level. And he wanted to help me try to get a handle on some of that grief. And he says, David, I want to do a guided imagery exercise with you. And the guided imagery exercise, if you've ever done it, is you close your eyes and you allow a friend to walk with you in some images in your mind and in your mind's eye to take you on a little journey. So I trusted my friend, and we went on a little journey. It started out in a beautiful meadow of flowers, lush, that I was walking through, and eventually I came to a road that crossed over into a forest where there was this young child hanging from the limb of a tree, who released that down, and this little child invited me to go with a walk with him. And so we walked, and we came across this old country church, the ones that have the cemeteries in the back, and we continued to keep walking in this guided imagery exercise. I noticed as I was being guided in this exercise that in that cemetery there was a grave that was fresh. The dirt was still brown, and you could smell the earth, and there was the grave, but the stone, I couldn't read what was on it. My friend guided me just a little bit further, and we came to another house, and inside the house were people I love and know, all those who surrounded me throughout life, encouraging me and supporting me in the good times and the bad times. There was an exchange of words that were affirming. And then my little friend and I, we walked a little bit further into the house, into a bedroom. And it was in this bedroom that there was someone lying in the bed. And there was an exchange, a conversation. Conversation that was words of joy, of celebration, of anger, of frustration, of saying of that person that you have let yourself down and you haven't embraced the life that's been given to you. And then there was a sense of wholeness, of resolution, as the tape started to go backwards. And I left the house with my little friend and the people that were surrounding me. We came back to that cemetery where the fresh grave was in the corner. And on the stone was the name of the person that was in bed in the house, who I had a conversation with, that I could share my words with. And then we left the cemetery, and the guided imagery exercise just went a little bit further as my little friend, the child that was my guide, became something in me. And as the imagery ended, there was a notion that it was walking with the little child inside of me. It was a resurrection of someone who had died in me a long time ago. It was a new hope, a new day, and a new destination. You see, Easter itself is not just an ending point. It's not a destination in itself. Easter is a launching point. It's a launching point that takes us beyond. It's a commencement, seniors who are about to graduate. Easter is a commencement. It's a resurrection in our lives. It is a resurrection that leads us from our dead selves. Resurrection that always goes before us. It's a resurrection that carries us into the future, made anew, and mending us toward wholeness and a sense of peace of mind. You see, Easter is not among the walking dead. It's a prelude. You see, the prelude to all resurrections includes death. And death leads to a journey that is among the living. Resurrection. Resurrection is that child that comes back to life in us. That child that comes back and tells us the jokes that we remember when we were young. Reminds us of something that leads us not to walk with the dead, but leads us to the walking living. Christ is risen. Christ is risen in you. Christ is risen in me. Christ is risen in us and is alive indeed. Thanks be to God. Let the people sing, Amen. Amen.